Stories with Kishen is back. I am back. I am so excited to be back before you. I've been talking about this reboot 3.0, and we started off in 2019, right before the pandemic. And then there was a pause, and then I did a reboot, and now this is reboot 3.0. Stories with Kishen is back, y'all. I am so excited to be here. I have talked about and teased a little bit that this was going to happen. It is happening right now. And I am so excited to share with you the young lady who I will be bringing to the virtual screen, the virtual show. So if you know anything about Stories with Kishen, Stories with Kishen is ordinary people with extraordinary lives. And the young lady that I have before you is no exception. So let me just tell you a little bit about who she is. Tika McCoy is a passionate Christian who finds joy in spending time with Jesus and delving deep into his word. Armed with a master's degree in family and consumer counseling or consumer science, she seeks to empower and support Christian women as they navigate the challenges of life after grief, loss, and divorce. McCoy's desire to uplift and encourage shines through her words, offering solace and guidance to those in need. Beyond her professional endeavors, McCoy finds joy in her role as a cat mom to Sasha and Bella. For those cat and fur parents, you understand what this is all about. When she's not immersed in her work or spending time with her feline companions, McCoy indulges in her passions of biking, traveling, and reading. Currently residing in Michigan, she finds immense joy in observing and admiring God's awe-inspiring creations, including bees and butterflies and hummingbirds. I remember the first time I saw a hummingbird, I thought it was a big bee because they're so tiny and they're just beautiful creatures. Her memoir, Broken Clay, Finding Renewal in the Potter's Hands, reflects her deep love for God, her dedication to helping others, and her unwavering belief in the power of faith and restoration. Through her writing, McCoy aims to uplift and inspire readers, offering them a glimpse of the transformative grace that can be found in a life dedicated to Christ. Find out more about Tika McCoy at tikamccoy.com. Are y'all ready? This lady is going to just bless you. I read her book. I am blessed just to be able to bring her to the virtual stage. Welcome, Tika. I am so glad that we finally were able to make this happen.
Yes, thank you so much, Kishen. I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
As you should, because 2024 has already started off differently in a direction that you wanted it to. I'm guessing you just started a new career path. So
Yes.
Let's talk about that, and then let's jump into your book.
Yes, so, for the past 30 years, I've worked in corporate America. I started out in banking. I left banking and went to insurance, where I was a corporate trainer. But here's the thing, Kishen. I went to school, so my undergrad and my graduate degrees are in family and consumer sciences. I've always wanted to help families and individuals in need. But once I got out of school, I found a job in corporate America. So fast forward 30 years with everything that has happened in my life and how God is just directing me. Now I find myself finally in an opportunity to be able to help families and children in need. And I just feel that it's just God moving in me to be of service to his kingdom. And I'm the happiest I've ever been.
There is nothing like being the happiest you've ever been, because life has ebbs and flows. And although right now you are the happiest you've ever been, this book, it wasn't all glitz and glam.
Mm-mm.
And it's called Broken Clay, Finding Renewal in the Potter's Hand. For those of you who follow Stories with Kishen, you know that I tab, I read books, I tab, I highlight, I've done all of that in this book. I recommend that you get this. Go to TikaMcCoy.com, get your copy. And especially, and she talks about a loss, grief, and divorce. And if you've experienced that, I think I've experienced all three of those. I'm thinking, I've been divorced, I've suffered grief or gone through grief, and I've had loss. So I think it's appropriate for us to have this conversation today. So let's talk about how you came about writing this book.
Yeah, so, we, our parents want us to achieve the American dream, right? And that is ultimately our goal as well. And so I lived a pretty uneventful life. I had loving parents, a loving family. I got married. I set out to have this American dream, bought a house, and things were going well. And then, the floodgates just opened up. And those floodgates were not a good floodgate. It opened up, and I experienced things in my life that I had never experienced before. And I was treading water. My marriage began to crumble. I lost my mother. I had to sell my marital home. I mean, when I tell you, I could not catch my breath before the next event happened. And I was broken. I was angry at God. I didn't want to talk to him. I didn't want him talking to me. But he did talk to me.
Let's talk about that, because I have been frustrated, not quite understanding why is this happening. I do this, and you try to rationalize it. At least I did. I'm like, okay, Lord, but I do this and I do that. Why is this all happening? So talk about, let's, and you mentioned the divorce and the marriage first, and there may be somebody right now who is struggling in their marriage. So talk about that a little bit.
So I struggled in silence as my husband began to have an affair.
Now, how did you know this? Because women, people will say, women know, we know. So how did you know that this was happening? And I know you reveal some things in the book, but just where did that first sign, what was that like? How did you know? What was the first moment?
It was the alienation of affection, right? We weren't, sweet like we were before. We weren't holding hands and cuddling and the things that we would normally do on the weekend. He had other plans that he wanted to do that was out of the ordinary. Like, why are you having these plans when this is something we've always done? Why aren't we intimate in the way that we have always been intimate? And when you're married, you know the level of intimacy that your husband likes, right? You get accustomed to that. And that had changed. I don't want to say our schedule or our intimacy routine, but it was off. The other thing that I noticed, he started drinking. He never drank before. And he was grieving. And I do hint at that in the book. I wanted to be fair to him. I didn't want to make him out to be the bad person, because he was going through his own grief. And him trying to manage his grief, he began to drink alcohol, which he had never drank before. I was the one that when we went out to dinner, I would order a glass of wine and he always ordered a Coke. And this was for our entire marriage.
Yeah.
He began to drink. And then I also began to notice our intimacy was changing and the way that we were communicating. And I just knew something was off. And I began to suspect. I said, if you're not intimate with me, something's not right, because I know what I know your level of intimacy. So,
well, let's talk about that a little bit, because I like the fact that you said you don't want to bash him, because sometimes people will get into the amen corner and they will try to justify bashing somebody and making them look bad. And I've been guilty of that. I'll be honest, I have been guilty of that, but I've grown, because there are two sides to every story. So I'm glad that you even said that he was grieving. And so having that empathy, understanding that he was going through something too, I appreciate you sharing that. So you noticed that things were different, things had changed. and you think it could have been contributed to that possibly, but you noticed that he started drinking and just the whole dynamics of your relationship changed at home.
Right.
Okay. So go through that process, because tell us about what happened in your marriage, which I thought was very endearing, towards the end of that storyline. So just talk a little bit about that part of it.
So as I began to suspect things, and it just with the alcohol drinking, and then with my pain of knowing and fear of losing my marriage and my husband. We had met at 15, so he was the only man I've ever known. So my fear in losing him, I became angry, and then everything that he was dealing with, he was angry. So we were very combative. And I wanted to catch him in the act, right? Because it's one of those where I would always say, just tell me and let's deal with it. Why continue to go through this fighting and this back and forth? And so I was adamant on finding proof. And I have a chapter devoted to this in the book. But I'll just say, it's one of those things where we really do have to be careful what we ask for. Because when it comes and when we find it, it could be very traumatic and devastating. And I confronted the woman, and it was not a good confrontation. And I'll just tell you, I found myself in a jail cell. And this was devastating because, like I said, every parent, they want their child to achieve the American dream. And I fought for that. I worked hard and never been in trouble before in my entire life, never even got a speeding ticket. And then found myself in a jail cell. I mean, that's how bad things had gotten.
Let's talk about that, because for people who have never been in jail, I've never been in jail, but I hear stories, and you have your own ideal of what that looks like. You anticipate all these bad people. I mean, just talk about what that was like for you. What was that experience like? How did you feel? And could you believe that was actually happening?
I cannot believe it was actually happening. I remember, you get your one phone call, and I remember calling my brother, telling him, he's like, what? And I was like, I can't talk now. And I remember asking him, don't tell, our parents. I was hoping to be able to escape that without them ever finding out. But I remember having just almost like a heat flash, because I saw all these different movies and TV shows, and I figured, okay, someone's going to try to fight me. People are going to want to all of these. But I'll tell you, Kishen, I can laugh about it now. But when I got there, people laughed at me. They thought it was so funny, because everyone would say, "You don't look like you belong here. What did you do? What did you do?"
Right.
School teacher. So, and it was just weird, just navigating. So each time the police officer, the correctional officers, each time they would come and move me to a different place in the jail to put on the uniform or to take my mugshot. Each time it brought me into contact with different individuals that were in jail, and they all were laughing at me. They all wanted to know, what did you do? You do not look like you belong here.
So you had a mugshot.
I had a mug.
You had to put on a uniform.
I had to put on a uniform. I had to stay. And I remember when they were asking me to change into the jail uniform, I was like, wait, you mean I'm staying? No, this does not happen to Tika. I don't get speeding tickets. I follow the rules, and here I am. Here I am. This is real.
Did they, because I'm trying to paint a picture. So you were actually, they picked you up at the scene.
Mm-hmm.
You were handcuffed,
put in the back of a police car, and never been in the back of a police car before. And I remember, and it's a hard plastic seat. And so, my hands are behind my back, and I'm trying to position myself. And, you can't move because you're sliding around this hard plastic seat. And then I just wound up kind of landing on my right elbow, and I couldn't move anymore. And I just remember looking out the windows, just watching the landscape. And I was just like, I don't know how I got here, Like, how did this even happen? My emotions had gotten the best of me. My pain and fear and anger had gotten the best of me, that I went to this woman's house and confronted her. And that's how broken I was, right? So when I talk about broken clay, and when I share that story now with people, and I say, what type of mindset do you have to be to go to someone's house? Like, anything could have happened to me. No one knew that I was there. I was broken. I was beyond broken. And so it led me there. And that night, like after I went and talked to him, because my parents found out Grand Rapids is a small town, right? Everyone is 6 degrees of separation. When my brother picked me up the next day, he let me know that they knew, right? Someone saw me and contacted them. And I, went to their house, and
somebody saw you.
Yeah, someone recognized me in jail. And so that Grand Rapids grapevine got going, and the word got back to my parents. And I never wanted them to find out. I had hoped that they would never find out. And I, asked my brother not to say anything. And so I had to go and talk to them. And that was really my turning point, because of everything that was happening in the marriage. I still wanted my marriage. I still wanted my husband. But now I had to face my parents and admit to them that my marriage was not good anymore. I had to admit to them that my husband was having, an affair, and that I was, going through all of these things. So having to confess to my parents and also confess to my brothers forced me to act, because otherwise, and I honestly, I loved him so much, and I was just so wanting to still be with that man, that I was willing to keep our secret in hope, right? I was willing to keep this secret and to go through all of this drama in hopes that he would, eventually stop what he was doing and choose me.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I had to confess that now everyone knows. Now I'm forced with making a decision on this marriage.
Yeah. That's, as someone who's gone through a divorce, who wanted the marriage to work, who wanted not for people not to look at her as a failure, who wanted to keep her family intact. That's tough.
It's real.
That's tough. And people didn't understand why, but I get you on that. I understand. So I'm glad that you shared that. But eventually, so you did end up getting a divorce.
Mm-hmm.
But talk about what happened that was sort of like I don't want to. It was the endearment part of the genuine, unconditional love that you both have for each other. So let's talk about how that comes full circle.
Yeah. So a year after we had divorced, and after our divorce, like every now and then, he would text me or call just to kind of check in. So we still kind of had some touch points. And so a year after our divorce, it was getting close to our wedding anniversary. And I remember feeling emotional. And one of his friends called to let me know that he was sick. And he says, you need to go see him in the hospital. And I thought, the hospital? How could he be that sick that he's in the hospital?
Yeah.
And he was at the hospital in Detroit. And I picked up his aunt, and we drove in the middle of the night to Detroit. And I saw him, and he did not present the way that he was. The illness had, really started to consume his body and his features. And I still loved him, and I just remember calling and asking for prayers for family. And he was eventually transferred back to Grand Rapids. And, doctors are honest in terms of, where we're at, with his health. And so every chance that I got, I was at the hospital. I was feeding him. I was washing his face. We were holding hands. We were able to tell each other that we loved one another. And I was so happy that we had that opportunity to express our love, because we did love one another. What happened in our marriage was his brokenness, his grief, as well as my brokenness and anger. But we had known each other since we were 15.
Yeah.
And so in those moments when he was in the hospital and when I could go and care for him and feed him and clean him up, that was very endearing. And I'm glad that we had that time together. Not everyone has that opportunity to be able to make amends with someone that you loved your entire life. And I'm glad that we had that opportunity.
Oh, wow. I got my tissue just in case, because I'm listening. Because I read the book and I was like, what? So I was very impressed with your ability to, not just yours, but his too, ability to forgive and move forward, because that's not common. Some relationships are so damaged that it's difficult unless both want to move forward in that regard.
Right.
So shortly after that, there was another tragedy or traumatic situation that happened in your life. So let's talk about that. And let me just mention this. This is a memoir. This is her life story. I mean, episodes of her life in this book. So this is not made up. And what I really like are like the end of the chapters, sort of like a reflection. So it's therapeutic. So I would recommend, the information is at the bottom. Get your copy at tikamccoy.com. So go ahead, Tika.
Yeah, so even before Jerry had gotten sick, I lost my mom. And so I was dealing with the loss of my mom before we even got a divorce. So, I was dealing with, and I'll just say this, 6 weeks after I gotten out of jail was when my mom passed.
Yeah.
So when I said at the beginning, the floodgates opened and I was treading water, I mean, it was just really one thing after the other. I just really couldn't catch my breath at all.
And you and your mom were really close.
Really close. I'm the baby girl of the family. I have older brothers. So my mom and I were extremely close. We just had a fantastic relationship. Yeah. And I harbored a lot of guilt after my mom died, because Jerry and I were still in the throes of all of our drama, and I was still madly in love with him. And I admit this in the book. I struggled with grieving my mother because my marriage was so consuming. And I thought, how could I just felt like the most awful daughter in the world. My mom and I were best friends. We talked every day, all day. And my father would always ask, what do you have to talk about all the
time? I get it. Because my dad passed away. And I'm daddy's girl. We talked about football, basketball. We talked about sports. We talked about life. And we would just, he was a talker. Oh my goodness. And so we would have those long 3-hour conversations. So I get it.
Every day. Yeah. And I struggled with, wanting and needing to like grieve my mother. And every time I would close my eyes, I would think about something that he and I were going through. And I was just like, because you're such an awful daughter. Like, how could you allow this to take over grieving your own mother? So I was dealing with the loss of my mom, dealing with the drama of Jerry, and then, us eventually getting a divorce, and then him getting sick. And I had to sell, my marital home. And that was devastating because I went from my parents' house to Jerry and I. So that was only the second place I've ever lived. And I had lived there like 18, 19 years. And then to have to pack that up. And I had never lived on my own before. And that was frightening and scary. And, when you're in your house, you're used to how it settles and the sounds that it makes. And so now I'm in this different space, in this different neighborhood, and I'm hearing sounds and I don't know what these sounds are. And
Right.
God bless my brother. He would come and walk through the house for me, or it was
Come
so
on, bruh.
yeah, yeah. And so, even that, so just losing my mom, my marriage, and then losing the house that we had built together,
Yeah.
and having to start over. And it was scary, and I didn't know, what to do. There were many nights I didn't sleep. But I still got up and went to work on 30 minutes of sleep at night, because I still needed my job, and I would go out at lunchtime and set the timer on my phone and take a 30-minute nap, because I would get an hour lunch, and I would set my timer and sleep in my car for 30 minutes and then fix my makeup and the visor and then go back into work. It was tough.
So, and there were other losses?
Yeah, I lost my brother. So, and this is how much I was going through, Kishen. My mother passed in 2013. Jerry, he passed, my ex, he passed in 2014. My brother passed in 2015. I couldn't grieve one for the next event that happened. And in between that, I had to sell my house and start over.
By yourself?
By myself. Yeah.
Wow. I'll ask this, and there was sort of like a mention of it in the book. So you didn't have children?
No.
How was that? Because I know people who were not either able to have children or trying to have children. What is that like, especially, or do you think that had anything to do or any part to play in your marriage from your perspective or from your ex-husband's?
So unfortunately, like you said, we weren't able to have children. So throughout our marriage, we had different bouts where we would start an adoption application, and adoption is really hard and it's expensive. And so we had different bouts, and, sometimes our heart would be broken and then we would close that file, and 5 years later we would start up again. And so we had started, we were 40 years old, and we were having the conversation that, we're getting there, in age. And if we're going to be parents, we really need to try. And so this was going to be our last hurrah. And we started working with an agency over in Detroit. And, we did all the approval process. We were approved. And every now and then, we would get calls like, maybe a mom is looking at your file, or, would you be interested in this particular situation, or a sibling group. But we really felt like this was going to be our opportunity to be parents. But then all of this stuff started happening. So before Jerry started grieving the loss of his mom and grandmother, and before, the affair started, we were doing the application process. And as things just began to unravel in our life, and I say this, I just made the hardest decision ever. I called the adoption agency and told them that Jerry and I couldn't go through with the application because I was afraid. Our life was a mess, and this would have been the time that a situation would have finally came through, and they would have been like, "Come to Detroit and pick up your newborn daughter," right? And our lives were a mess, and I couldn't live with that.
Oh, wow.
But it crushed me, because I was like, this was going to be our last hurrah. And this was going to be my last opportunity to be a mother. And, my nursery was all set. It was beautiful. And, I had to give all of that away and donate it. And, that's one when sometimes people have asked, will I write another book? I said, if I do, it would definitely be on my experiences on adoption and infertility, and just grief of all of that, in terms of how you navigate life without children. You go to birthday parties and people always ask, when are you guys going to have kids?
Yeah.
And it's a harmless question, but, after so many years of dealing with infertility and trying, those questions just start to cut.
Yeah.
And so that is something that had left me broken, but it is something that I still have a heart for. I still think like, man, I'm older now, of course, but just the thought of not being a mother still pains me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is tough. And if I ask somebody, because I'm mindful of that, and so I try to be sensitive to that. If I see a couple, they don't have children, sometimes they don't want to have children. But if I ask, sometimes I feel uncomfortable asking because, especially if they've been married for so long. And I just try to be cognizant of that and not to make it worse, because I know I'm probably not the first person to ask the question. So like you said, it's like, okay, here we go again. And you have to re-explain yourself, and you shouldn't have to do that. But I find myself, when I hear that, then I back off, because I'm sure it's sometimes discouraging. And then, sometimes things happen and you're like, oh my gosh, you're pregnant. So I just, again, am so aware of that I'm glad that you shared that there is another part of your story that you touched on, but you didn't go too in detail with, that I think will be enough to leave people hanging, wanting more, because you're not the only one who's gone through that.
And where I'm at with my faith right now, I can't help but wonder if that was also God's protection, right? Because there was just so much at the end of our marriage. And, even me having to start over and, sell our house, I can't help but just wonder, like, God was protecting me from, trying to handle something that he was like, you know what, with everything else that's on your plate, everything else you're dealing with, this isn't something additionally that you can handle.
Yeah. So as we wrap up, and again, the information is on the bottom of the screen for you to get your copy, your own book. I got me a copy and I have enjoyed it. If you could just give, like, what are your most important growth lessons, if you could, over the past years that you've written that book, that have made you stronger, that has increased your faith, that has just really made an impact on the person that you are today?
As I was going through all of that trauma in my life, and God speaks to us all differently, I began to recognize God's voice in my life when I cried out to him and a Bible verse would come to me that maybe a friend had given me to read like 2 or 3 weeks earlier. Or I would hear songs on my Pandora that was just like, why are these songs popping up? I began to recognize that these things aren't coincidences. It isn't happenstance. This is God. And I had to be able to sit down and say, okay, what is God doing in this moment? And what is he telling me? And it's that is what strengthened my faith, because when I thought that I was moving on my own, when I thought I was doing things on my own, it was God all along. And I had to learn to be able to recognize that this isn't a coincidence. This is God directing you. Listen to this, read this Bible verse that it came to you for a reason. Get to church. This is why, you had all of these signs that you need to get into church. And it was those things that began to happen to me that I began to have more questions. Why is he giving me these signs? Why is he not giving up on me? When I was angry and frustrated, and like I said earlier, I didn't want to talk to him, but he wasn't giving up on me. And I needed answers. I needed to know why he didn't give up on me. And that was my thirst to read the Bible more. That was my thirst to find the answers to the questions, because I needed to understand why he loved me the way that he did and why he didn't give up. And it's that I just had to share with everyone, because I just went through so much. And like, you were sharing, like even with your divorce, we tend to think that we are alone, but God is with us every step of the way. And if we can listen to his voice and recognize when he is speaking to us, that prayerfully, if someone is going through something, they don't make the same mistakes that I made, right? Because I was making those mistakes listening to myself and not listening to God. And once I was finally able to hear his voice and recognize it and to be quiet and silent, I recognized that he has you. You're not alone, and he's going to get you through. And I just had to just tell everybody that.
I would agree with that. Listening to his voice. Sometimes when you listen and you don't see something happen right away, it's hard. Because I remember when I quit my job in the fall, I was in prayer. God said quit. I'm like, okay, that can't be God. So the next day I'm in prayer. I'm like, okay, Lord, I hear you. And he said, quit today. I'm like, so that was several months ago. And I'm in this situation right now. And I said, okay, Lord, I have to follow what you said and trust and believe, no matter what it looks like, because Satan will play tricks and he'll start to just gnaw at you and just throw doubts in your mind and make you think, I have just made the wrong decision, but all along it was God.
Yes. And so that is the big takeaway. Know when God is speaking to you, because he interacts with all of us differently. And to know there are no coincidences with God. It's no happenstance. It's when he's talking to you, it's real.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you. Get your book, get your copy. That's how you get the copy. Make sure you get it. And so, again, I know that we connected last year. Now we're here. I am so grateful. Now, have you done a book signing or anything like that? What's next for you in this space?
Yeah, so I've done book signings at my church. I attend Life Quest Urban Center, and I've gone to several different book fairs. I just got back from Detroit. So I'm spending this year going to different book fairs where I'm having the opportunity to have conversations with other people. In March, I'll have a booth at the Women's Expo. So the Women's Expo at DeVos, every year they have an author alley. So I'll have a table there. And in May, I'm going to another book fair in New Orleans. And so as they come up, I'm just, getting out of my own backyard and getting out and having conversations. And I love it. I'm loving the opportunity to talk with women, to hear their stories, to hear that there are similarities. And then I have so many women that have reached out to me and said, I see some similarities in my own life. Thank you for sharing what you shared. And women saying that I've wanted to strengthen my relationship with God. And I'm glad that you shared your story, because I am wanting to go back to church. I'm wanting to pick up my Bible, and reading my story has encouraged them to do that. And there's no greater feeling than that, to have someone say, I want to strengthen my relationship with God.
I love it. So this is ministry, truly ministry.
Yes.
And so people can contact you at TikaMcCoy.com, correct?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Well, I want to thank you so much for your patience. Even today, I want to thank you so much for your understanding. But most importantly, I want to thank you so much for writing this book. I believe it will be a tool, a resource for women, and maybe even some men. Maybe, they experience grief, or maybe they want to figure out how to do things better, do things differently. And I think it will be definitely a tool and resource for others. So if you can just hold on in the waiting room, I'll wrap up, and then we will say our final goodbyes.
Thank you.
There you have it. I am so glad that you stayed tuned in. And what are your thoughts? Are you interested in learning more about Miss McCoy? Her information is at the bottom, TikaMcCoy.com. Please connect with her. You're going to be blessed. I was blessed. I mean, listening to the places that she's traveling to share her story. And maybe you have a story that you want to share, but nobody's going to know about it if you don't share it. So contact me if that's something you're interested in doing. But nonetheless, I hope that you were blessed today. So again, I am Kishen. I'm excited. You are tuning in to Stories with Kishen, ordinary people with extraordinary lives. Until next time, take care. God bless.